All right, you guys. So, what is next for Diddy Combs, Sean Diddy Combs in this case? I don't know. Obviously, I'm not a legal expert and certainly not a criminal law expert. I think his defense team faces an uphill battle now in terms of the bail. Not even so much the trial itself, because they still have a lot of time to line their ducks up with that in theory. But in terms of the bail, which is something that he obviously wants right away, I mean, I don't think they're going to get him out. Excuse me. I mean, it's not impossible, but they would have to appeal the decision, and they would have to show there is an error that the court made, an error of law, an error of facts that the court below made. And I I don't see how they meet that burden, of showing that there was a mistake of law, a mistake of fact on the lower court, on the appellate level. But, stranger things have happened. Um, I'm sure there are some constitutional and policy arguments that they can come up with. Um, Central to the appeal probably would be the constitutional implications of the raid itself, of the conduct of the prosecution in having this raid conducted in the first place and using materials from the raid. And and then of course the broader question context of his rule violations with using the code from other inmates to make calls that he shouldn't have been making. Not that he shouldn't be making the calls, but he should not have been using the method he used to make the call. And on appeal, though, I don't know. Again, you have to show there was a mistake of fact, a mistake of law. Um, you know, did the judge interpret these calls correctly based on existing law? Um, Look, I mean, I think they have to challenge the constitutionality of the raid itself, but that is only going to get them on the notes, the seizure of his notes, right? That purportedly contained attorney-client privilege material. Um, it would, they would argue that it undermined his right, his Sixth Amendment rights to confidential legal counsel. But I don't think the judge focused very much on the notes, right? I think what the judge really focused on is the breaking of the rules of, using those codes from other inmates. This is against the rules. It's against the rules of the jail. And he knew that. Diddy knew this, right? And so, how do you explain that to an appellate court? What mistake did the lower court make? I think the mistake they made, I mean, one could argue, I mean, this is a desperate Hail Mary here, is how they interpreted the violation itself. You have to, I think, on appeal, reframe the rules, the violations as a constitutional issue. Um, and this would allow Diddy to say that his actions were not an attempt to flout rules, using the codes from other inmates. It was not an attempt to flout rules, but rather it was a necessary step to protect his Sixth Amendment right to counsel and to, you know, yeah, all of the things that come with that. I mean, confidentiality of his communications and so on. Okay, he wasn't talking to counsel when he made those three-way calls, but within his Sixth Amendment right is the right to um, effective legal counsel. And what he was doing with these phone calls was to try to bolster his case so that he could assist his counsel with being more effective in making arguments on his behalf before the court, if that makes any sense. That was a word salad, but I mean, what I'm trying to say is that the phone calls in effect were part of his right to effective legal counsel. And a part of that right includes being able to have meaningful and private communications with his attorneys or with individuals that are going to assist him with communicating with his attorneys, communicating his case to his attorneys, communicating the strategy that he wants his case to take or to use to his attorneys, right? And so jail policies that restrict or survey legal calls or even just calls made in furtherance of his legal rights, you know, undermine his right to effective legal counsel, right? Um, Especially if they can show that these policies of not using third party phones, for example, are overly and unnecessarily burdensome. I mean, who cares if he uses a third party phone? Only people who are trying to survey his communications in the first place, right? And that's exactly what he was trying to circumvent. He did not want his communications surveyed. He wanted privacy, and he's entitled to some degree of privacy when it comes to the communications that pertain to his legal counsel, right? To his case, to what he is going to bring to the table to his attorneys so that they can provide him with effective legal counsel. Part of that being even the PR strategy that he's trying to orchestrate to offset the damaging PR that was being waged against him without, unchecked, right? In the society, in the global society, right? He was trying to have some private conversations about that, and it was impossible to do that on his own phone, which was being monitored clearly, right? Clearly, as we all see. Not only was he being monitored, he was being openly rated as well, right? Now, apparently, in many detention centers or facilities, I should say, um, calls to attorneys are closely monitored or they're subject to significant. So it's like, they're subject to significant logistical delays, right? So if Diddy's jail restricted his ability to communicate confidentiality to communicate confidentially and efficiently with his legal team, but also with other third parties with whom he wanted to communicate so that he could help his legal team mount a more efficient and effective defense, then the defense could argue that he had no choice but to use unconventional methods like third party code phones, whatever, to safeguard his constitutional rights. I mean, it's a stretch. It's a stretch because they clearly have said that, the jail has a policy that you can't use somebody else's phone, right? Because they want to monitor you. But this very monitoring itself, the very policy itself of monitoring, inmates when they're trying to make confidential calls pertaining to their case, which they have a right to, be able to do that so that they can have a fair trial, is itself something that needs to be addressed, I think, by the defense. I mean, look, I'm just trying to come up with some ideas here. I mean, I think he's cooked. He's not getting out. I mean, at this point, I'm like, oh my God, he's probably not getting out even after he's going to be convicted, in May. But maybe I'm being a pessimist. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But for now, if you take this in small bites, I mean, the appeal is the first thing on the plate. And assuming he doesn't fire his whole team, because he could become desperate and fire his whole team, so we have to wait and see what he does there. But assuming he has enough self-discipline just to stay the course and stick with the team and try the appeal, or maybe he won't even bother. Maybe he'll just say, you know what, it's just a waste of money at this point. Never mind. But I mean, if they're going to try the appeal, I think they're going to have to address or attack the policy in the first place of, not allowing um, someone to have a private and confidential conversation pertaining to their legal case, and forcing someone to circumvent these rules and use unconventional methods in order to safeguard their constitutional right to effective counsel, you see. Um, for example, delays in accessing secure legal lines or restrictions on the frequency and duration of calls could have directly impacted his decision to use these methods of circumvention, right? And it could also have impacted his ability to participate in his defense, which is his constitutional right, if that makes sense, right? I think the defense could further highlight how monitored calls undermine attorney-client privilege. If Diddy reasonably believed that using the standard inmate communication system jeopardized the confidentiality of his legal discussions or discussions about his legal case, take your pick. Yeah, so take your pick. I mean, if you reasonably believe that using the standard communication system jeopardized the confidentiality of his legal discussions, he may have felt compelled to use other inmates' phone codes to ensure privacy. And this really is the key word, is that he did it to ensure privacy, not to break rules, right? Now, the necessity could be framed as a direct response to systemic flaws in the jail's handling of these, communications where inmates are communicating about their legal case, right? And do you see what I mean? It's like there's a flaw in how the jail handles that, because an inmate, especially one who has not yet been adjudicated guilty, has a right to be able to have some privacy, right, in his communications about his case. And so the reason that he did what he did was not to be a bad boy and break the rules, but to try to ensure that his conversation pertaining to his legal case was private, right? Can the defense say that on appeal? I have no idea. I mean, I think they would have to sort of reframe it to say that his actions reflect a desperate man, a man desperate for some privacy in his legal communications, not a man who was defiant of the rules of the jail, you guys. Think about it, right? So rather than being framed as willful disobedience to the jail's rules, Diddy's phone use, the use of the third party phones by other inmates, owned by other inmates, which is against the law, he admits that, but it can be characterized as a desperate measure taken by a man who was fighting for his life and certainly fighting for his right to a fair trial, right? The defense could argue that such actions that he took, these actions that he took, stemmed from a lack of sufficient resources and accommodations for pre-trial defendants, if that makes sense, right? Right. So these shortcomings, in other words, in the jail system, um, not a disregard for rules, is what led to his violation of these so-called rules in the first place, right? It's the shortcomings in the jail system, the lack of an ability to have a private discussion pertaining to his case so as to assure that he has a fair trial, is what led him in desperation to use these measures, and not because he wanted to violate the jail's rules, right? It's about reframing the act of the flouting of the rules, right? This framing shifts the narrative from one of intentional misconduct to one of a defendant struggling to navigate a flawed system, right? Wherein he can't have a private conversation, a confidential conversation about his defense strategy, right? So he went and he tried to hide and use somebody else's phone to avoid, you know, everybody knowing his strategy, right? Right? So this framing shifts the narrative from one of intentional misconduct to one of a defendant struggling to navigate a flawed system, reinforcing the broader argument that his constitutional rights are being compromised. Sorry about that, are being compromised. I mean, I don't know if that was that word salad. Did that word salad make any sense? Did my word salad make any sense? What time was it? It's like 4 o'clock in the morning. So anything I say at this time of the day, I'm not sleeping well. I'm just, I'm up at 3, 4 in the morning. So I figure make a video. Anyway, see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.